Here to look at Panama. Everybody knows where Panama is, I assume. It's right there. Yeah. In between Costa Rica and Colombia. Just a little bit of historical background about Panama. It was settled by Spain in the 16th century, and then it joined the Union of Colombia in 1821. It's important to note. It's important to note that America the United States of America played a big part in the development of Panama. Most of the population is below 65, but it's important to note that 64% of the population is economically active. So that means a lot of them, a lot of the young people can, make a lot of strong purchasing within the economy. Most of the population lives around the urban areas, which is really centered around Panama City, which is their main city. Their GDP is 30 billion, which is a bit higher than Trinidad. But you would see that the GDP per capita is a little bit lower than Trinidad, but that's just because of the inflated size of their population. We can see that Panama's growth rate in 2012 was 10.6, which is very strong compared to our growth of negative 1.3. It's important to note that, pardon? Sorry. Yeah, so I'm just saying that Panama actually was one of the only economies that was able to weather the economic crisis and were able to bounce back at a much faster rate than a lot of other countries within the region and internationally. Again, they have that strong link to the Americans, the United States of America, that is, that their currency is now the US dollar, which has moved from their currency of the Balboa. Their imports, 22 billion. I just wanted to make a note that you can see from their import partners is basically Japan, China, Singapore, etc. When you look at our import partners, we look at US, Brazil, Russia, Gabon, etc. It's important to note that our main import countries are oil and gas. So we only import in raw materials from them, whereas Panama would be importing final finished products. Right. So this is some more economic statistics on Panama. The figures are a little bit small, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the imports for Panama on a whole are increasing over this 8-year period from 2008 to the forecasted 2016. Also to note that exports are also increasing, but at a slower rate. So their balance of trade is actually growing at a startling rate as well. So that trade deficit is projected to increase, so meaning that they will begin to import increasingly more and more over the next few years. Right. The Panamanian economy is heavily service-based. Almost 80% of the economy is, based around services, which in comparison to Trinidad is only 41%. Interesting, I thought, that the Panama Canal generates $2 billion by itself in tolls alone. So that doesn't even include like taxing or anything for anything. 2 billion, sorry. So the Panama Canal is expected to be expanded over the next 10 years as well. It'll be completed by 2014. The reason why this expansion came about is to be in line with the 100-year anniversary of the canal being completed. Also, the canal has the use of the canal has outgrown it. So the size of the ships are now prohibitive. So now they're trying to increase the canal so that larger ships can pass through and have greater throughput. So by 2014, they expect to have 28,000 transits, which is up from 14,000, which would be current. I just want to make a mention that to show this table here that highlights the expenditure within Panama. It shows that the middle 60% or the middle class accounts for 44% of their expenditure, while the richest 20% accounts for 52% of the expenditure within the economy in 2012. So that means that there's a lot of expenditure happening, but it's happening because of the middle class and the richest 20%. So based on the figures that I've shown for the economic overview of Panama, you can see that Panama is a very attractive market for exports. You know, they're buying a lot. What Kofi mentioned is that retail is increasing, showing that imports are increasing. So what I wanted to do now is look at the Panama tissue products in Panama and how that looks. The content is basically the same as what you've seen for the other presentations so far. There are two main producers in Panama of tissue products. That's Papelera Ismenia, or Papisa as it's called. They hold about 60% of the market share in terms of retail sales. They generate $70 million annually. And they have their products are Unico, Tenda, Sensacio, and Suave Gold. A lot of them are on the table at the back, so you could look at it during the break. And you'll actually see a lot of these on Trinidadian shelves in the grocery and stuff from time to time. Just a note about Papisa, they've been rapidly expanding over the last few years as well. They've been buying a lot of smaller brands and factories within their region, so they're growing at a dramatic rate. And the other producer in Panama is Kimberly-Clark. It's produced there, and they produce like a lot of the American brands like Kleenex, Scott, Cottonelle, etc. And just so you can see the different ranges of the products. Again, you can look in Trinidadian groceries and you'll see a lot of these products there. Most of them come from Latin America. In terms of the trade of tissue products, you can see that Panama's exports of these products has been small in comparison to their imports. Their exports have kind of been fluctuating a little bit, basically plateauing over the last 6 years. The imports, however, have been increasing at a really strong rate. So there's about a 91% increase from 2006 to 2010, and 2006 to 2011 it's about a little more than 100%. And their trade balance is consistent with what their overall trade balance is looking like. It's increasing, it's negatively increasing. Just pictorially, you can see that this is the line in the middle here is their exports, and their imports are growing, and therefore their trade balance is declining. So it's a market that's looking for a lot of new products, and it's importing at a heavy rate. But when you look at where the products come from, a lot of it comes from Costa Rica, US, and Mexico. So it's a fairly concentrated market in that about 70% comes from these three countries, while the rest account for the latter 30%. Just to note as well, Panama is a supplier to Trinidad, so tissue products from Panama come to Trinidad at $23,000 in 2011. Again, that's why you see a lot of them in our groceries. When you break out the tissue products, you see that most of that import demand comes from sanitary napkins and those kind of products, and that's also increasing over the last 5 years. All of these products are increasing in this time series, except for tablecloth and these apparel made from other sources. So you can see, again, it's a strong demand for the products, and it's projected to keep increasing. There are several specific market characteristics for tissue products in Panama. One major thing that I noticed is that in Panama, the toilet paper is 1,000 count single ply, 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches, which is a little bit different from what we're accustomed to in Trinidad, where we would see 400 to 500 count double ply. So I mean, if a company from Trinidad wants to export to Panama, they'd have to be very cognizant of the fact that the products are a little bit different. So you have to package it a little differently and brand it a little differently. I've found out that there are many companies that actually perform this 1,000 count to make sure that you really supply 1,000. So they're very particular about that 1,000. The people in Panama, they are often paid weekly or fortnightly. So that translates into a small purchase culture where they don't purchase a lot at a time. They purchase small things. So like for instance, with tissue products, they would buy like a few rolls at a time to just last them for a week or two. When it comes to like food and beverages, they would buy small bottles. So like you would find like a 100 milliliter bottle of pepper or ketchup, so it's very, very small, but just to last them until their next payday comes around. In terms of their market segments, tissue products is, it's not a very dynamic way of segmenting their products. You have high quality at high pricing or low quality at low pricing. The two companies that I mentioned before are producers. Papisa would cater to the middle to low income so that their prices are, middle to low. And Kimberly-Clark sells to high income markets, so their quality is a lot higher than what you would find from Papisa products. In terms of their market access, Trinidad products would have to face this 10% duty from Panama. In addition to that, you pay 7% VAT. That VAT is charged to everything across the board. The only thing different is that for some products like alcohol, you pay a little bit higher percentage of VAT, like 10% for VAT. I just wanted to make mention of the regional trade agreements that Panama have. Costa Rica, Mexico, Colombia, El Salvador, and Chile have agreements with Panama, which, just to back up a little bit, you see them here as top suppliers to Panama. So, those are the countries that have good market access because of those low rates of duties, and they get in there at very, very low pricing. Well, a lot of us know and heard the gentleman from Ministry of Trade speak about the partial scope agreements that we have going on. We have one going on with Panama. Mr. Hibbert could correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time the agreement was signed, but then when it was taken to COTED, COTED needs to give their blessing on Trinidad signing any new agreements. But when it was taken to COTED, a couple members objected to about 10 products or so. So the way forward now is that Trinidad has to ask those countries to either withdraw their objection or then have to go back to Panama to engage in negotiations again. But if the objections are withdrawn and they get that sorted out, it will likely be passed by COTED in the next COTED meeting, I think in November. In terms of packaging, there's nothing really remarkable about the packaging for tissue products in Panama. I'm saying that because the products are very, very similar to what we see here. A lot of the products are the same. It's traditional packaging, just plastic wrap for the tissue products and the toilet paper, and napkins and facial tissue come in colorful printed boxes. A point to note too is that in terms of the labeling, you don't necessarily need to have the labels translated into Spanish. But if you do have any warnings on the label, that needs to be translated. So for instance, if a tissue product has some kind of allergen or something that could irritate your skin, that needs to go onto the labeling. Or if you have a food product that has gluten or something that may have been produced in a factory with peanuts, that needs to go on the label in Spanish. But everything else doesn't need to be in Spanish. And just to give an example of some of the products and their packaging offerings. Again, some of those are at the back of the table as well. For commercial practices, in Panama, there doesn't seem to have one overarching set of beliefs in terms of commercial practices, but in general, they deal with FOB pricing, free on board, terms and conditions, 30 to 60 days. If a company is interested in your product, they often request catalogs, and in the catalog they would expect to see product dimension, product features and specifications, the weight, and of course price lists. And if they're very interested in it, they would like to come and visit your factory to see how it's being done, if it's done in accordance to their specifications and stuff like that. When it comes to transport into Panama, you could either go by sea or you could go by air. Most of the times, sea freight is preferred. In this example I'll give here, it shows that you can leave the port at Point Lisas in Trinidad and go directly to Panama in Cristobal, the port of Cristobal in Panama, and that takes about 10 to 12 days, and it sails weekly. The price for a 20-foot container is about $2,730, and a 40-foot container, $3,705. Similar to the other Latin American countries, we found that there's a very basic distribution channel. I was very surprised by that because I thought, because the Panama Canal would probably be a very complicated, convoluted type of arrangement to get from the exporter to the consumer. But apparently it turns out that is very, very basic. You sell directly to the importer, distributor, and then to the retailer, and then to the consumer. A lot of people asked if you can do business directly with the retailer. And when we were there, they told us that they don't mind doing it, but they tend to stay away from it because the warehousing costs they face are very, very expensive. So they prefer to allow the importer and distributor to handle that warehousing cost, and then they will just buy it from them when they need. For promotion of your products, in most instances, the Panamanian companies would insist on shared costs. So you enter into partnership with them to do your promotional plan. In that way, they believe that you could share the risks and share the costs. But also, I believe when you do it like that, you actually have more of the ability to hold on to your brand and develop your brand a little better than just putting it in the hands of the distributor to do it for you. In terms of the types of promotion, again, it's very, very traditional. The things that you would usually see anywhere, print, TV, in-store, bundling, that kind of thing. All right, and just finally, the market opportunities for Panama. Again, the first 4 points just kind of looks at the Panama economic side of things where, they have a strong purchasing power, they have positive GDP growth, they have a large middle class, which a lot of our products would cater to. Their labor force is strong. So, they have purchasing power and they would be able to purchase our products, even though, our products sometimes are a little bit more expensive. Another opportunity is that we have the partial scope in train, and it looks to be completed very soon. Like Mr. Herbert was saying before, with a partial scope, you have to look a little closer at what exactly is on the partial scope list. But if your product falls within that list, you'll get duty-free access, so could be able to bring down your costs a little bit more. Contract manufacturing and private labeling is something that a lot of companies spoke to us about in terms of detergents, some food products, and those kind of things. But they were very interested in that, so that they then could keep their own brands, but not have to worry about themselves producing it. And finally, the importers in Panama were suggested to us that they would prefer to do consolidated shipments at first, because they know that for a new product from a new country, they wouldn't necessarily be able to sell container loads of it at a time. So it would be beneficial to Trinidadian exporters that they can collaborate a little bit and get those first few shipments in at a good rate. And just lastly, the market opportunities we identified for Panama weren't only in tissue products. We had a lot of interest in beverages, household and cleaning chemicals, and sauces and condiments. The others below weren't so popular, but I believe if it's marketed well, we would be able to get in on that. So, thank you.